To order, our purpose here is to have some discussion on the use of Sourcewell and for the commission to consider whether or not we're gonna allow that as a part of our procurement plan. Had a discussion with Jessica last week about that. I think word got to Richard, cause I think you both have used
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And, I think what we have heard from the prosecuting attorney is that that is an option if the Board of Commissioners has approved it officially as an option for purchasing. So we are hoping to hear a little more for the public education and ourselves, what Sourcewell is, how it works, how you guys use it, and then we can choose to take action on that if we want to. So, with that, I turn it over to you to start us off, and feel free to jump in.
Perfect. I'm glad that Richard reached out to me when he saw that this was on the agenda, because Sourcewell has been utilized by both of our departments in the past, and by other departments as well. I know ambulance district has used Sourcewell. And so I felt like it was important to talk about, because there was some question in the last couple months about Sourcewell, surrounding Sourcewell. Are there fees to use Sourcewell? What is Sourcewell? Is it legal? All of those important questions. So I've been diving in. Richard has done a ton of research into Sourcewell, and we've both been kind of researching independently, and then we got together and kind of talked about it. And so I guess we'll just kind of dive in with a little bit about Sourcewell. Sourcewell is actually a government agency. It's located in the state of Minnesota, and it started out to kind of help alleviate some of the extra time and costs that come along with procurement. There are a lot of laws, both federally, state laws as well. All the laws are similar but different in the different states, and it all regulates our purchasing and at different dollar amounts and levels and different things we have to do to satisfy those requirements. And so Minnesota got together and said, why don't we try to do something and create kind of like a hub where this Sourcewell, and it's since had a name change, but now it's Sourcewell, does the process for us. And so they do a good job with that. And that one is overseen by a board, and there are several elected officials that oversee Sourcewell and the processes. So what Sourcewell does is they will do the RFP process, and they will publish it, so it satisfies all of the codes that need to be satisfied. And then those contracts are available to public entities in the United States and some areas of Canada to be piggybacked on for like cooperative purchasing is what they call it.
Contracts, could you explain a little bit?
Sure. So basically, the Sourcewell will put out an RFP, a request for proposal.
Okay.
So that would be something similar to like if we have something that's over, $50,000, that we would have to put it out for RFP. We would have to publish it. We would have to keep a record of that. It'd have to be published for so long, and then we would accept bids on that, and then we would do a bid opening, and then we would normally award to the lowest bidder. And so sourcing that out, doing the research, writing up a proposal, putting it out, publicized in the paper, is very, very timely and can cost quite a bit. A lot of departments will have their own procurement departments. Larger counties and entities will have their own procurement department. Our procurement department is the department heads or the elected officials, depending on who needs to spend what. And so that can be very cumbersome if for departments such as mine and Richard's that have larger budgets that do have line items for capital purchase or leases as well, because it's a process that we have to go through for leasing as well. So what Sourcewell does is they will put together RFPs, and they will put them out, and they're active for so long. You can access any of the RFP information on their website. Then what happens is they will solicit bids, and the bids will come in, and then they'll do their bid opening, and then they will do a ranking process to satisfy the requirements. And then at that point, a contract would be awarded for that. And so the contract is, you know, a set markup, and it's adhered to strictly. And so then that contract, so let's say I needed to purchase like a 950 loader. And so I get on Sourcewell and I look through their contracts, and then they tell me who has been awarded contracts for these particular pieces of equipment. And then I can reach out to the vendor and reference the contract number. Shoshone County, we are members of Sourcewell. You have to be a member to be able to utilize their services. And Richard and I are both signed up as main contacts through Sourcewell. The fire district is signed up, ambulance district is signed up, school districts are signed up locally. Throughout the state of Idaho, there are 320 agencies that are set up as members to use Sourcewell, just in the state of Idaho. As far as nationally and some in Canada, they service over 500 or 50,000 members. So they're what happens is they put it out, and Sourcewell is kind of the benchmark for this. They're the largest government purchasing cooperative of its kind, and so all of the vendors know Sourcewell. They usually all partner with them. Sourcewell puts their RFPs out nationally, and so you get more response and traction, whereas if Richard and I were to put out an RFP, it would go out locally in the press. And then we would hope that, you know, one of the local vendors would key on to that, and then submit something probably with some local pricing. This is gonna give us national pricing. And so, you know, I could go to a cat dealer not using Sourcewell, not referencing as a member, and I could go to one in, I don't know if there's one like in Yakima, or I could go down to somewhere in California. And if I put it out in these different states and I'm not using the Sourcewell reference, the contract reference, I could get 3 different prices. With Sourcewell, when we reference the contract number and our member number, we're gonna get the same price if we go to the cat dealer in Hayden, or if we go to the cat dealer in New Mexico. It keeps it consistent across the board, and you're always gonna get the lowest prices. And so when they score, because they score the bids, the proposals that come in, the responses to their RFP, they have a team of, I believe it's 8 people that do the scoring, and they score it on like a 1,000-point system. And not all of the scoring is based on price. A lot of it is, but some of it's based on value, which I feel is really important, because when we put out locally for RFP, we're gonna put something out, and then, you know, you guys are gonna probably make the ultimate decision. I mean, Richard would make a recommendation to you, or I would make a recommendation to you, but the decision is ultimately up to the board. And I feel like it's good that we're comparing apples to apples at this process, because, you know, Richard is gonna know exactly what his department needs, what works, what doesn't work. We're also gonna have some background, each of us, our departments, on how the local customer service is, because that's hugely important. You know, you can get something dirt cheap, and it's gonna look really good on paper, and it's gonna look really good to the budget, but if it's not of quality, it doesn't last as long, or you can't get good service on it. I feel like all of those things should be considered. So that's all looked into during this process when they're scoring the RFPs. And
They
so,
look into it?
Mm-hmm, they look into all of that. And then, you know, then we can reach out, like, you know, if we wanted to reach out to John Deere, and we had an idea that this was a particular grader that we wanted, and we liked it because of its, you know, antler steering, or there was a reason we liked that, or maybe their customer service was better than CAT, or something like that, or vice versa. Then instead of not being able to have those be considered in the process of picking this. We know that if we decide to go with John Deere, or we decide to go with Cat or Kenworth or whoever, that the process has already happened, it's been vetted. So it allows the local agencies, especially the smaller ones that don't have their own procurement department, to be able to have a little more say in what we purchase. And a lot of it really, and I mean, Richard and I have had a lot of discussions about this, a lot of it is the customer service that's afforded to us. And we're a little further out, and you know, he's had good experiences and bad experience with certain companies. I've had good and bad, maybe in a different respect on our end. And I wouldn't want that to factor into the board's decision, when you guys look at the bids, to say that this one vendor, you know, I've heard a little bad review about their service. We would want to be able to have that conversation with Richard and say, you know, why do you feel that this company's gonna be better? Because now we've taken the price factor out of it. We know we're getting the lowest price. We know we're getting the lowest national price, and that won't vary. And that's checked. So let's say we go through the Sourcewell process, we make the purchase and everything is great. The documents from the vendor will go back to Sourcewell. They will reference the contract, they will keep track of who has used this contract, how many people have used it, and they'll make sure, they'll check the pricing. They'll make sure that that vendor is holding up to their end of the contract. And so it is really a great tool to be used, especially by the smaller agencies. Now, larger agencies that have their own procurement department, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that's all they do is procurement all day long, and that's their job. They don't have other things to do. Richard has a transfer station to run and employees to manage. I have 4 road districts to run and employees to manage. And so the time that it saves and the cost that it saves, because it does cost to publish those.
Are you finding that you're seeing more savings through local bids?
So really it's not even just local bids, because we are getting the national pricing on this, and so we are consistently getting the lower price. There are gonna be purchases that we might opt to not use Sourcewell on, and that's something, each purchase, you know, when Richard does it for his department or I do it for my department, you know, we look at what we're getting, we look at what's available, we look at the contracts, we reach out to the vendors and kind of have some conversations. And we always, you know, if we've got, and I just keep using examples for like equipment, like the 3 of the biggest ones that we use are John Deere, Cat, and Case for numerous reasons, but that seems to be kind of the big 3. Let's say that we have 3 equivalent machines, and so we don't have a preference. If we don't have a preference, if there's no swing factor, such as we've had a bad experience with this particular service department or something like that, there's nothing to kind of decide that for us, then we would ask for the prices on those. We would exclusively go by lowest price, because Richard does a great job with his department. I feel like the Public Works Department's done a great job with our department. We always look at price. And if at all, I mean, we want to save the money. We want to save our department the money. We don't want to spend any more than we have to, but we really need, as the representatives for purchasing for our department, to be able to say, even though this is $10,000 lower, the quality is not as good. And so therefore, I would like to make this purchase. It is within our budget, and then the board would need to decide. And so that's kind of really where I'm going with this is, you know, like David said in the beginning, Sourcewell has determined to be a legal avenue for us to use. However, it's specified in Idaho code that the board has to approve the process. So even though we've shown it to be a legal avenue to use for procurement, we can't use that avenue unless we get an official approval from the board. And so today, that's really kind of what we're looking for. I've got a purchase that I've just kind of had sitting on my desk. I did reach out through Sourcewell. It falls under the budgeted amount. It was approved through the LATCF funding. But I've just sat it there until we could have this proper discussion, because I know there's been a lot of questions from the public, questions from the board too. I mean, I didn't know about Sourcewell until I started here. What is Sourcewell? So, Richard, is there anything that you can think of that I forgot to talk about?
No, you're feeling pretty good. The one number that stood out to me when kind of looking through all this stuff, it's roughly a 27% discount off of market price when we go through Sourcewell. So it's considerable.
And they do get, the discounts get deeper through Sourcewell because you have so many vendors competing, and that's where they get the majority of their business. So they wanna do sales in volume.
Yeah.
Even though we don't do sales in volume, ours is just one of the volume that they're measuring. So it really behooves them to be as competitive and as low priced as possible. And there are some vendors that Sourcewell will disqualify. I mean, that's happened in the past, and if you look through some of the contract history, there's a lot of information to be had on their website. And so I would encourage each of you to pull it up and take a look at it. I did pull out, I don't know if you guys are interested, this is kind of one of their handouts that's printable. They call it the Decider Guide, when to use cooperative purchasing to add public dollar power. And so,
Thank you.
Margie, did you want a copy?
Sure. Thank you.
And so it just kind of talks a little bit about maybe why to use cooperative purchasing, what is cooperative purchasing, and some considerations to make. You know, obviously they need, this is a Minnesota-based company, but they do, they are very well aware, because when they first started, they only serviced Minnesota. And then it took off, and they did so well that they allowed other states that had codes within, you know, their state statutes, that had cooperative purchasing, provisions to be able to piggyback off of those. State of Idaho, does have a member number through Sourcewell, so they do utilize Sourcewell, and, so I think that it's important to look at that, and not only is it just equipment, but there are lots of different types of purchases like that on Sourcewell. You can even get into certain types of services. That's really not in the wheelhouse that Richard and I are interested in using. Right now, we're just strictly looking at our, you know, spending off of our capital budget line.
So they do like engineering?
So they don't do like engineering contracts, but there are some other types of services that they would
Okay.
do. But they really do it right with their processes, and they've
Okay.
actually signed like a contact person to Shoshone County. And when Richard and I got on there, and we made sure to update the contact information, because Shoshone County was registered as a member, but then you need to make sure that they have a good email address and phone number for,
Okay.
you know, each department. And so when Richard and I purchased, we both purchased under the Shoshone County member, but they have separate contact information for Richard, and they have separate for me. And that representative did reach out to me last week, and I talked to her and said that I'd be talking to Richard, and that I let her know this meeting was coming up. This is interesting, because I talked to her in length. I said, is there anything else that you can give me, to kind of help educate the board and the public about this? And because I kind of said, you know, we've determined that this is a legal avenue for us to use, but there's that little caveat, there's that little line in the code that says it has to be approved by the board. And I said, we've had some questions from the board as well as the public, about using Sourcewell. And she said, that's interesting. She had said, I'd never heard it, be debated at this level. She said, normally when it's determined to be a legal avenue, it just happens. And so I said, well, here's your first, and I'll let you know how it goes. And so she was very helpful in, you know, answering any questions that I had or anything like that.
No, there's no fee involved?
There's no fee, and so,
Okay.
that's what I think is great, is that it's just such a great resource and it's free to use. There are some very small fees that are passed on to the vendors, but they happily pay those fees. And it's not put into their costs or anything, they just absorb the loss because it increases their sales so much. And so it really is a win-win for everybody involved,
So
from what I can tell.
help me explain to the public and us, how do we protect local providers? So like, we could still end up getting that equipment in Hayden or something just because we got national pricing, right?
Oh, absolutely, and we do
Yeah.
purchase,
Yeah.
we do purchase from the most local
Yeah.
vendors. So if we get
Absolutely.
something off of a cat, for example, let's say we get a cat 950 loader, and, we're gonna reach out to the Hayden dealer to do that. We're gonna reach out to the local John Deere dealer to do that, and so, you know, anything.
So national prices, but we're still buying.
But we're
these.
still
We're
buying
still
from
buying
the
local.
local, we are still
I just
gonna
wanted to make
purchase
that
from,
clear
I think
for
that's
the-
important, yes, and I did miss that.
Mm.
Yeah, so we are still buying as locally as we can. We still, you know, for purchases that can be had that, don't meet the criteria of having to be put out, we do all that we can do to buy locally. And there is, usually more organized than this. So there is a resolution from 2021 that, you know, talks about, is it the resolution from 2021? Oh, it was our procurement policy in itself. It talks about trying to support locally rather than go out, even if it means paying up to 10% more than somebody else. And so we do recognize that. We recognize that that's in our local, our county procurement policy. And so we do try to give business to locals as much as we possibly can.
Which
Yeah.
resolution is it?
Oh.
Just so I can-
Yes.
Should be at the top of it.
2021-12.
Thank you.
That's what I wanted to, you and I have talked about that, I just want to
Yes.
get that out for the public.
Yes.
That we're
Yeah.
getting national prices, but we're still doing
Mhm.
business locally.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
And we get, they still get 3 bids, cause I think that's what.
Yeah,
we
they
still
actually get way more than 3. They get all
but
the
we
bids
get
that
3
come
bids
in.
that come in, like we did with,
So actually with
so we see-
Sourcewell, you don't need,
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Oh, we
eliminates
don't-
the need to bring that in because that process has already happened on another level.
Oh, okay.
And so, this does satisfy the legal requirement for that.
Okay.
And so it really does streamline the process. And then, once we've kind of gone through the process with Sourcewell, we've located a contract that we wanna use, we've reached out to the vendor, we've been shown, a possible purchase agreement. Then at that point, we would bring it to the board for your signature, because those purchases always do require the board's signature.
When we see it, we know it's already been through
It's
at
already
least
been
3
through
bids.
that process, because we
Yeah.
will have a
Yes.
Sourcewell contract number to reference, and, we will always list our Sourcewell member number on that as well.
And that would satisfy it with that piggyback
Yes,
code that we have, so
Yes.
that would fix that, okay,
yep, that would satisfy that, cause they've already gone through that process.
okay.
And then if you wanted to look up that contract number, you can actually look up the contract number on Sourcewell. And so it's a very user-friendly website. There are a lot of different layers to it. So I've spent days and days just kind of going down little rabbit holes, who's here, what's that, looking at the different vendor availability. It's even more vast than what I had even thought it might be. And so then there's different categories of things to purchase. You can actually look at some rental equipment. It's not even just purchasing. And then when we do look at our equipment leases, the pricing and the process goes through Sourcewell as well.
And this
So-
is for government only Sourcewell,
This
they
is
don't
for
use any-
government, public, and nonprofit. It's not available to like the private
Okay.
sector. Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Did you start to have a question there, and we cut you off?
No, that was answered.
It was answered?
Yeah.
Okay. Any further questions from the board on this, or comments from you guys before I'll open it up to the public questions?
I don't think
No.
so.
Public question?
Yes. Kinda confused on the 3 bids. You say you're only gonna bring 1 bid to these guys.
Because that is the winning bid. The bids have already come into Sourcewell for that particular
No,
contract.
I've been through Sourcewell, I
Sure,
know what you're
yeah.
saying, but, so you're gonna, if the county goes out for something,
Mhm.
you guys' department's gonna pick which machine you want, whether it's the highest or lowest. And that's the machine you're gonna bring to these guys, they're not gonna see the case,
Sometimes we will, sometimes we can only get two. We can pull from different Sourcewell contracts on similar pieces of equipment
Right.
that would satisfy our needs. And if it was between two or three, we could bring that to the board. You know, we could, and it really, I think, is gonna be up to kind of the board, how you wanna handle that. You know, do you want us to bring you 3 Sourcewell contracts? It does kinda add some to the time. Or, you know, what would your preference be? And Richard, do you have any suggestions or input on that?
Well, when we were doing the skid steer, that kind of turned into a bit of a debacle because the one dealership did not understand what I needed. And I had a real hard time getting that information across to him. He kept sending me, when he would send, the wrong equipment, basically. So it did create a bit of confusion doing it that way. But, that being said, you know, if you do want to see the 3 bids, you know, it's just gonna take that little bit extra time to get those 3 correct.
Now, this is also, there's a piggyback code that we can talk about that
Mhm.
where if another government agency purchases a like piece of equipment, we don't have to go through the process.
That's
But
correct.
We can
how far-
piggyback on that.
And that's
Yeah.
really the bonus of using Sourcewell. You know, because when it comes down to the purchase of equipment, I work with our mechanics and our supervisors to decide the best needs for that. I mean, just because we're approved for a loader, that leaves a lot. So then we decide which size of loader, which implements, you know, then we kinda hone that in. Sometimes what we're asking for from some of the other things or some of the other contracts that we would look at through Sourcewell aren't really giving us what we've decided we need. And so really I feel like Richard as his department head, me as my department head working with the experts on my team, know what we need. We know what our budget is.
So when you present that to us,
Yes,
and this
and we
is the
would
bid,
talk
and,
about
and
that.
you're
We
gonna
could bring
explain to
that-
us why
we
you
could
weren't
bring
using
that
this
to a
piece
separate
or
meeting.
that
I would be
piece.
happy to, you know, instead of try to put that on the agenda on Wednesday for a signature, we would just schedule a separate meeting and we would have a meeting to discuss, we're looking at making this purchase, we've gone through Sourcewell, we're only bringing you one contract to look at because of this. And then at that time you could make the decision. I think we're pretty open to just developing processes moving forward for procurement for our department. And
Yeah, just to clear the water.
yeah, and just make a nice, clear understanding of, what you'd like to see, when you'd like to see it, and how much more would you like to see over and above what satisfies the legal requirement. I think really what it comes down to. You know, we will do whatever the board decides, as far as the process, but I think there's been some confusion in the last few months, both on Richard's end and my end, what the board's comfortable with us purchasing, whether it be budgeted or not budgeted, because there's lots of different provisions about, you know, what you could buy, when you could buy it, when you need the board approval, when you need this, when you need the 3 bids, and a lot of that is very clear, but I think when it comes down to processes, especially processes where we decide to use Sourcewell, it really would be up to the board to decide, because the bids they've already been solicited, the RFP has already been done, they've ranked, they've given that particular contract to one particular vendor, and we are using that vendor to, you know, that contract to piggyback off of. And so, as long as we have really decided this piece of machinery is best for our department and what we need, and the price is the lowest price, it's been through the process, and we bring that to you and you're comfortable that we've satisfied it, I don't know that you would want us to go through and entertain that 3-bid system with different vendors or the 3 different contracts, because then at that point, it almost defeats the purpose of, using
Using
Sourcewell.
Source.
You know, other than making
Right.
sure we get that lowest price. And it's a little bit different because under 100,000, you know, 50, over 50, under 100, you know, you can just request 3 bids. Anything over 100, you've gotta put that out, and then that is the process, that is the whole process. And I would like to say, you know, I definitely, if we cannot have to entertain that whole process, which is so tedious and cumbersome, we would like to not have to do that when the process has already been had through Sourcewell.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel that when you bring in what you've determined, just have the explanation of how you got to this point.
Sure.
Why we're looking at this equipment rather than this and that, and explain
Sure.
the pricing that you went through.
And a lot of what
And
we're coming
help
across to, maybe why we've chosen one company over another, is availability. Immediate availability, how long you have to wait. Prior to COVID, we didn't have to talk about this. Since COVID, through now and probably forever, cause that seems to be the way that it is, availability is a huge factor in the decision of which machine we're gonna go with. We have 2 comparable machines, but one we can't get for 9 months, one we can get into. And so that's gonna be a huge
You have so many
factor for
factors,
us
yeah.
also.
And that's also part of the Idaho code, because there's an addition to the procurement, and I think it's A, and then you can go down and.
Yeah,
it
there
says
are
about
some
bid,
different
there's
things
some
that,
different things you
that
can
you
do
can,
that.
yes, yep.
But Sourcewell, my question is when you look at those contracts and look at that piece of equipment on Sourcewell, it's already been purchased by somebody else, right?
Yes.
Is that what this?
Yes.
So basically, it
Because
fulfills
you've
that
got-
piggyback contract.
Correct, yes.
For sure.
Correct, yep.
Okay. Okay.
Matt, we kinda cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry
Mike.
about
My only concern is, like with Richard,
Mhm.
you'd only seen the one bid. You wouldn't have seen the Bobcat or what was the other one? John Deere at all. So you wouldn't have been able to say, okay, Richard, what's the difference here? What are you picking this machine over this machine? Because it's $5,000, yeah, less, and if he tells you this, why? But you won't see those 3 bids, you're only gonna see the one he picks. And I don't know how on Sourcewell they do it. Do you put in a specific machine? If you're looking at a cat, do you put down cat? And that's all they go to is cat?
You can look at CAT and you can look at their, they have a lot of different contracts through CAT.
I've been on the site.
You can search, yeah, you can search a machine, you can actually reach out to the vendor and you can ask them, we're looking at this machine, what's your Sourcewell contract number, or do you have one? And then we can get back on and reference and just double check and make sure that that's what we're looking at.
I guess what I'm saying is if you just want a Caterpillar, that's the only price you're gonna get. Cause Sourcewell is.
Yeah,
is
that would
done
be
it
the
all.
only one, and so you would get the lowest
Price for a Caterpillar.
price for Caterpillar, correct, nobody's gonna pay lower than that.
But I, like I said, I've got on the site,
Sure,
and so if you just want the Caterpillar, you're gonna explain that in the meeting why that was well, you're only gonna bring the one bid, so.
Yes.
You wouldn't explain.
yep,
why.
and then we would probably talk about why we only brought this one bid to you. And, you know, maybe it's availability, maybe it's service, maybe it's this machine just doesn't, on paper, it looks like it compares, but we've used it, and in our experience, this, and that. There's a lot of different reasons why I personally, depending on what we're looking at, I don't just reach out to one unless there's really a specific reason. I don't have a problem calling our sales representatives from these, you know, different companies that we've used in the past that have serviced us, and I know their stuff is good. And my first question is, can we get this machine from you, and what's your availability? And then can you send me the Sourcewell pricing on that? And, it's not uncommon to do a couple of 2 or 3 outreaches to check into Sourcewell, because really at the end of the day, I can't reiterate enough that Richard wants the best equipment for the lowest price at his facility, and as do I. I'm always very conscious of my budget. I know that what's left over in my roads budget doesn't get absorbed into somebody else's budget. It stays with the road department, so I know that I'm saving money for the county, for my department, and it's important for my department to do that. And I can operate better and more efficiently, if I can get the best product for the lowest price.
I'm struggling a little bit with the not seeing 3 bids, just because at some point we're in danger of not doing our job of making sure, I mean, you're doing the job for us, and Sourcewell's doing some of the work for us, but we're just sort of rubber stamping, and we can't really compare or hear your, I would wanna hear your logic. Yep, there were more than one choice, and this is why we chose this one. How much more work is it to you to have to do 3, to come with 2 or 3 to show us versus 1?
I mean,
You just went through this process recently.
yeah, I mean, I suppose if you were working with a dealership that would actually listen to you.
Yes.
Would help. But I mean, no, I don't think it's that much more work. I think it's doable. It's definitely, a little bit more, but if that's what you want, I mean, I don't see there being a problem with it.
It's not gonna destroy you if we ask for that, it's not gonna wipe out your time completely, like, we're not doubling your time.
No, and I do think, for the larger purchases, if you're allowing us to consider Sourcewell contracts in the 3, cause we could bring 3 Sourcewell contract vendors to you. If we're able to get them. If we can't, if we only have 2, then we would say, we tried this, and this, we've only been able to provide 2. So we would bring our reasoning with us to the table at our meeting. I think where it's really gonna save us to be able to use Sourcewell is on those purchases over $100,000, which are also gonna be the categories of our leases and things like that, because those are usually what we lease is the higher end stuff. We lease graders, we lease loaders. Those all are in that pocket where you've gotta formally put them out. And so by allowing us to use the Sourcewell contract references, that's gonna save some time for us, it's gonna save some money, and by not having to put that out. And then we could still bring you the 3 Sourcewell contracts, and then we can talk about why or why not.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think, and I think that's a really good compromise that, you would feel comfortable with, the public would feel comfortable with, that Richard and I are pretty comfortable with. I think the biggest thing is we weren't sure, could we or could we not reference these contracts? Because if we can't, then that puts it in a different category, so.
We appreciate, I know you do,
Yeah.
both do an excellent job at your departments, you're awesome.
Thank you.
And it's just a matter of to satisfy, everyone else is
Mhm.
looking at it, and we can say this is the best they did for us, and we have the proof right here.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna change the outcome. It's
No,
just, we're changing
no.
the process to be a little more transparent to the public on how did we get to
Sure.
ultimately what you made that decision to do.
Okay,
So we're asking you to do a little more homework maybe, but I think that protects you too.
okay.
That
And
works for me.
Mhm.
Okay, I agree.
any other questions there?
Mhm.
Matt, did we satisfy your?
One last question. So it's nationally, but you're really trying to buy in the Northwest, aren't you? I mean,
Yes.
that's not.
Yeah, no, we don't go out, we would not entertain
Because shipping
shipping,
would be
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, we always are, we're not gonna use really different vendors than we have, unless something comes out and we're like, wow, we didn't realize that we could work with this particular company, and we've heard great things about them, but we're still gonna buy from
As
Hayden and
local as we
Coeur
can.
d'Alene, or,
Right.
yeah, wherever we can
Right.
get the most local.
Right.
And a lot of that too is, the number 1 thing that we look at is local, the very number 2 thing we look at is service.
Yeah.
availability of service to us.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
important.
service is a
Mhm.
big deal.
It's
You can't
huge.
be down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we tour your facilities, we can see that and
Yeah.
appreciate what you guys are doing as a maintenance, and that's, you're both doing a good job with that, and it's appreciated. Well, At this point, I would entertain a motion that we officially approve the use of Sourcewell as a part of our procurement policy. And, I don't know if we can make that part of the same motion that we've also expressed our desire to see 3 bids, but I would make that a part of that motion if that didn't get too complicated for you.
Okay.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion further from the commissioners? Thank you two for your.
Thank you for your
part.
great work. You guys are
Thank you.
awesome.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Sourcewell is officially approved. So
Great.
we can proceed and not have to wait.
Yes, thank you very
Thank
much.
you guys for coming down and
Yeah, thank
explaining
you.
it.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.